إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته, and welcome to this exciting series through our journey through Islam in the world. How has Islam spread? What do we really know? There are so many keywords that we have heard. And we have started with Europe. We have gone into 𝗘𝗥𝗡 bin Ziyad's influence and 𝗘𝗥𝗡 bin Ziyad's opening of the Iberian Peninsula in the last episode. This episode, I would like to actually move on. Now, 𝗘𝗥𝗡 bin Ziyad opened al-Andalus for the Umayyads, the dynasty that took over straight after the Khilafah Rashidin, the four caliphs, the righteous caliphs, whom we all know. We know that after the death of our Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in the year 632, we know that the four righteous caliphs take over, and after them, the ones that come, the first dynasty that takes over is the Umayyad dynasty. The Umayyads, when they take over power, they obviously want to also leave their stamp behind. There is no doubt about it that the Umayyads as a dynasty, which was actually quite unique and different now suddenly, because the righteous caliphs did not establish a dynasty, Rasulullah ﷺ did not establish a dynasty, but now with an upcoming of a dynasty, we see that things have changed. Of course, things have changed. Many people nowadays, people who might be hobby historians or people who might like history, look into that and have different perspectives. Even historians have a different perspective of what the Umayyads actually have done. The about 100 years, we can say, the century of the Umayyad rule in the Muslim world, had influenced the Muslims very strongly and has left their marks behind. And one of that mark obviously is the opening of Al-Andalus, as we discussed before, 𝗘𝗥𝗡 bin Ziyad arriving in Gibraltar, leaving the legacy of the Muslim Umayyads behind. But then the one who actually really started the dynasty and the power in Al-Andalus, in the Iberian Peninsula, was actually al-Rahman al-Dakhil in Arabic. So al-Rahman, the immigrant, or the migrant, basically. Basically was rather a refugee than a migrant. What happened to al-Rahman? al-Rahman I, the Umayyads had taken power between 650, 660 up to 750. You can say around 749, 750. When the revolt started happening already 3-4 years before, 647, the first revolt basically in the Arab Muslim world, and the Abbasids took power from the Umayyads. The Abbasids, that's another dynasty basically. So again, nothing changed with regards to one dynasty gets exchanged by another. And from now on, by the way, the entire Muslim history until nowadays basically is ruled mainly by dynasties, and we're talking about dynasties from the beginning to the end. So the first dynasty, the Umayyads, take over. Under the Umayyads, it is 𝗘𝗥𝗡 bin Ziyad who arrives in Gibraltar, in the Iberian Peninsula. But then 𝗘𝗥𝗡 I is the one who actually puts a stamp for the Umayyad rule in Al-Andalus, and that happens in the middle of the 8th century. That's when the Abbasids take over, get Baghdad, exchange Damascus for Baghdad, because the Umayyads had Damascus as the main capital. The Abbasids transfer their capital to Baghdad, their power and might to Baghdad, and persecuted all possible Umayyad, the whole entire dynasty, princesses, and they, without a doubt, they killed anybody they could find in front of them, up to even North Africa. Many Umayyads tried to flee, many Umayyads tried to find refuge in North Africa, but they were actually all exterminated except one, and that was 𝗘𝗥𝗡 I, 𝗘𝗥𝗡 al-Dakhil, who fled to North Africa, and from there he saw that he could not stay there. He fled further into Al-Andalus. And that's when the real history of Al-Andalus actually starts. 𝗘𝗥𝗡 I, al-Dakhil, is the one who actually establishes an emirate in Al-Andalus. So he becomes the first emir in Al-Andalus. And from there on, the history of Al-Andalus is unstoppable. From there on, from the upcoming 4 for 7 to 8 centuries, we will see that Al-Andalus changes drastically. The Iberian Peninsula changes drastically. So the Umayyads now rule from their capital, Córdoba. Córdoba becomes one of the most important cities in Europe, is just competing actually with the other side, the eastern part of Europe, meaning Constantinople, the Byzantine Empire. So there is the Umayyad Empire on the one side, the Muslim Umayyad Empire, and in the east, southeast of Europe, we have Constantinople, the Byzantine Empire, which is a Greek Orthodox empire. So these two empires are the strongest, most advanced, and most civilized, most cultured actually empires in Europe of that time. There is another person whom we have to mention here, Charlemagne, who is actually the Frankish ruler of the entire western or even northwestern part of Europe going into Germany nowadays. So Germany, France, these are the main areas, the Benelux countries, they all belong to the mighty empire of Charlemagne. But with regards to culture, civilization, there is no doubt about it that the other two empires, not the Catholic, not the Frankish, but the Greek Orthodox Byzantine Empire on the one hand and the Muslim Umayyad Empire on the Iberian Peninsula on the other hand are much stronger and much more advanced. We should not forget that during that time also, in the 9th century, we see the first universities establishing in Europe. And they were not in Christian Europe, but in Muslim Al-Andalus, mashallah. And this is extremely important to see. But with regards to Abd-ul-Rahman I, what does he do? He establishes an emirate, allows culture and civilization to flourish as we actually know it nowadays, but this is something unique. We're talking about a continent, let's not forget, that might have a big ancient and classical history and civilization, the ancient Greeks, Rome, without a doubt about it. However, what is coming now to Europe is something very unique. We're talking about a culture of tolerance, a culture of civilization which could not be found anywhere else in the world. They indeed, you can say, the Muslims and under Abd-ul-Rahman I established a culture, established actually paradise on earth. We can clearly say that. And there's enough documentaries, there's enough out there if you want to go on YouTube, if you want to go online, if you want to actually watch documentaries that have been made about Al-Andalus and the power and the might of that empire, feel free to watch them. And you will see that without a doubt, we can clearly say that a paradise was established on earth, and it was the Iberian Peninsula, subhanAllah. And not only, because Al-Andalus was established first as a geographical territory, meaning the Iberian Peninsula up to the south of France. However, it did not just include these territories. Al-Andalus as a geographical territory was just the Iberian Peninsula, but Al-Andalus as a chronological period of time started in 711 when 𝗘𝗥𝗡 arrived in Gibraltar and ended in 1492 with the fall of Granada to the Catholic king and queen. In between this time period of more than 700 years, in the time period between 711 and 1492, countries such as Italy, islands such as Sicily, Malta, Cyprus, Crete, and many more others, Switzerland in Central Europe and the south of France, they all open to the Muslims and have all a legacy to show until nowadays, the one more than the other. It's important to see that with the arrival of Abd-ul-Rahman I, Abd-ul-Rahman al-Dakhil, in the Iberian Peninsula, establishing such an empire for the upcoming 7 centuries, this empire will basically get us to talk until nowadays in the 21st century. Abd-ul-Rahman I establishes Córdoba as the capital. Córdoba became a competition to Constantinople, had during his lifetime had reached already 500,000 inhabitants, which for that time was a massive amount. Constantinople had actually just 1 million, so they were competing, as I said, against each other, and not only with regards to population, but also culture, civilization. We are talking about libraries. Some sources talk about 40 to 50 libraries within the city of Córdoba, and Córdoba is nowadays actually a smaller town somewhere in the south of Spain. If you look at Córdoba nowadays, you cannot imagine there were once 40 and 50 libraries or 40 or 50 libraries within that town. Each library up to 500,000 books. An amazing amount of interest, of course, also for the Al-andalus for people from outside, especially from Christian Europe nowadays, going to study in Al-andalus at the universities. As we said before, the first university was established in the 9th century in Al-andalus in Muslim Europe. Christian Europeans coming over to study, having to learn Arabic. SubhanAllah, imagine that nowadays our children go to study in the West, they go to study in Germany, in the UK, in France. They all, of course, have to learn French, German, Italian, English. And that time, it was Arabic they had to learn. They even had to study the Quran for the Fusha language, basically. So imagine Christian people coming from Central Europe, from Northern Europe, settling for a longer period of time in Al-andalus, and that meant that time not only just Spain, but also Portugal, also Sicily and Italy, and going to study at the Muslim universities there, subhanAllah. So these people came back to Central Europe and brought the civilization that they got to know, the Muslim civilization, and they brought also the Arabic language with them even, subhanAllah.